With the fall of the Jedi Order and the rise of the Galactic Empire, the galaxy was plunged into darkness. Darth Sidious had achieved his ultimate victory, transforming the Republic into an oppressive regime under his rule. The Jedi were nearly extinct, betrayed by their own clone troopers and hunted down by the newly formed Inquisitorius. Among the last survivors of the Purge was Grandmaster Yoda, who barely escaped after a desperate duel with Palpatine in the Senate chamber. We know that after witnessing Padme Amidala's death and the birth of Luke and Leia, Obi-Wan and Yoda decided to split up the children and go into exile. Yoda chose to go to Dagobah, a planet strong in the Force, where he could hide, train, and meditate. In this video, I want to continue the series I've been doing exploring characters' lives in the years after Revenge of the Sith, explaining what they were doing in the 19 years between Episode 3 and Episode 4. We'll be looking at everything that happened to Yoda on Dagobah in canon, including things that involve the larger galaxy and things that were deeply personal to Yoda. On Dagobah, survival was Yoda's first priority. He initially used his E3 standard starship lifeboat as shelter, but the damp, humid environment quickly eroded it. Forced to adapt, he constructed a new home, a small hut made from natural materials deep in the swamps. He chose a site near the Darkside Cave, also known as the Cave of Evil, aware of its ominous energy. But rather than avoiding it, Yoda understood that his own presence in the light side of the Force balanced the darkness, preventing it from growing unchecked. Building his home was a painstaking process. The relentless rain and swamp conditions made it difficult to find stable ground. Yoda crafted his hut from gnarled roots, mud, and fallen branches, ensuring that it blended seamlessly into the environment. Over time, he made small modifications, reinforcing the structure to withstand the planet's harsh weather conditions. Dagobah was a wild and dangerous world, home to massive serpents, predatory creatures, and towering vegetation. Yoda quickly learned how to hunt and forage, developing a diet from local plants, fungi, and small animals. He discovered the planet's native nutrient-rich roots, which became a staple of his meals. He also learned how to filter water from the swamps, ensuring he had a clean supply to sustain himself. Navigating Dagobah's environment was a challenge. Yoda had to remain constantly vigilant, aware of lurking dangers in the murky waters and dense fog. Some creatures avoided him due to his strong connection to the Force, while others saw him as prey. He frequently had to relocate during the wet seasons when torrential rain would turn parts of the swamps into deep, impassable marshes. Yoda took shelter in caves on higher ground, ensuring that he remained safe from flash floods and unexpected storms. Despite Dagobah's remoteness, Yoda knew that the Empire was still hunting him. Imperial probe droids and the Inquisitorius searched the galaxy for Jedi survivors. Dagobah's strength in the Force cloaked his presence, ensuring that no one could track him. Occasionally, he sensed disturbances in the Force when Jedi fugitives were captured and killed, but he remained disciplined, knowing that breaking his cover could bring ruin to the last hope of the Jedi. As time passed, Yoda became one with Dagobah's environment, moving seamlessly through the swamps and adapting to its unforgiving conditions. He learned to communicate with the natural world, sensing the rhythms of the planet and coexisting with its many life forms. His exile was not just about survival, it was about patience, resilience, and preparation for the future. Though isolated, Yoda never severed his connection to the Force. Dagobah was far too powerful for him to do that. He meditated for long hours, seeking clarity and wisdom. His most important connection during this time was with his old friend Qui-Gon Jinn, who had discovered the path to consciousness after death. Through Qui-Gon's teachings, Yoda learned secrets of the Force never before mastered, preparing himself for the possibility of transcending death. Yoda's training with Qui-Gon was unlike anything he had encountered before. No longer was he learning through physical discipline or lightsaber combat, his training now revolved around deep spiritual enlightenment and understanding the Force in ways he had never imagined. Through intense meditation, Qui-Gon taught Yoda the principles of becoming one with the Force after death, a technique that very few in history had ever learned of. Yoda had once dismissed Qui-Gon's unconventional beliefs, but now, in exile, he saw the wisdom in his old friend's teachings. Even in his exile, Yoda remained aware of other Jedi survivors. He sensed those who sought refuge in ancient Jedi temples, feeling the echoes of their presence through the Force. He felt the losses of those who were hunted down by the Inquisitors, their deaths rippling through the Force like distant screams. One of Yoda's rare direct interventions came when Ezra Bridger and Kanan Jarrus meditated inside the Lothal Jedi Temple. Speaking to them through the Force, Yoda guided Ezra to his Kyber crystal, allowing him to forge his own lightsaber. This was a moment of great significance, proof that the Jedi spirit was not entirely lost during the dark times of the galaxy. Later, when Ezra, Kanan, and Ahsoka Tano returned to the temple, Yoda provided one final lesson, directing Ezra to Malachor, where his journey would take a critical turn. Yoda understood that these Jedi were forging their own destinies, and he played the role of a quiet guide, offering wisdom but never dictating their path. Yoda's connection to the Force also extended beyond living Jedi. He spent much time in silent reflection, communicating with the echoes of the past. The Jedi Order had fallen, but its wisdom remained imprinted on the Force. He listened to the voices of long-gone Jedi Masters, drawing from their teachings to refine his own understanding. Through these visions, he gained insight into what had led to the downfall of the Jedi, realizing their failures and shortcomings. He came to accept that the Jedi had been blinded by their own traditions, unwilling to change until it was too late. He wondered if he had doomed the Jedi Order through his own blindness, if he had placed too much faith in the old ways. The fall of the Jedi still weighed heavily on him, and he could not shake the feeling that his leadership had contributed to their downfall. He recalled the final days of the Clone Wars, the arrogance of the Jedi Council, and how they failed to see Darth Sidious manipulating the Republic from the shadows. But through meditation, Yoda sought clarity. He began to understand that failure was the greatest teacher. He had once believed the Jedi Code to be infallible, but he now recognized its rigidity had prevented the Order from evolving. The mistakes of the past were not solely his own, but the product of generations of stagnation within the Jedi Order. He came to accept that the Jedi would need to change if they were ever to rise again. One day, while making his way back to his hut, Yoda suddenly felt a deep disturbance in the Force. It was unlike anything he had sensed in years, powerful, raw, and filled with loss. He knew immediately that it meant Obi-Wan Kenobi was dead. His old friend, who had been in hiding on Tatooine for decades, had just been struck down by Darth Vader aboard the Death Star. A wave of grief passed over Yoda, but he did not despair. If Obi-Wan had fallen, it meant that the journey of the Skywalker children was just beginning. Days after his death, Obi-Wan appeared to Yoda through the Force. He had also learned to retain his consciousness after death, just as Qui-Gon had before him, and he reached out to Yoda to prepare him for the coming future. Luke Skywalker was ready to become a Jedi. At first, Yoda hesitated and insisted that Leia come to Dagobah instead. He had spent years meditating on the fate of the Jedi and whether they could ever return, and he had planned to train Leia. Luke carried great potential, but Yoda saw troubling signs: recklessness, impatience, and anger, traits that reminded him of Anakin. He wondered if training Luke would lead to the same disaster as Anakin's fall. Yoda had seen firsthand what happened when Jedi were trained too late, and the thought of history repeating itself weighed on him. But Obi-Wan reassured him that Luke was different. He had grown up in hardship, far from the politics of the Jedi Order, and he had not been raised as a warrior from childhood. He carried the same compassion that his mother had, and the potential to succeed where the previous generation had failed. With that in mind, Yoda finally agreed to train Luke Skywalker. Sometime later, Yoda made one final visit to the Cave of Evil, seeking clarity before his new apprentice arrived. The cave had always been a place of fear and temptation, a test for any Jedi who stepped inside. This time, Yoda experienced something different. He saw Count Dooku, his fallen apprentice, standing before him. The vision of Dooku accused Yoda of failing him, failing the Jedi, and dooming the galaxy by clinging to outdated traditions. More ghosts of the past appeared, Jedi who had died during the Clone Wars, and a Jedi from the High Republic, each blaming Yoda for their fate. But Yoda did not resist the vision. Instead, he accepted it. He acknowledged his failures, understanding now that the greatest teacher was failure itself. He had spent decades in exile, reflecting on the mistakes of the Jedi, and he knew now that the future of the Jedi Order could not follow the same rigid path as before. Luke could not be trained like the Jedi Knights of the past, and Yoda accepted that. In his final years, Yoda's physical condition declined. The harshness of Dagobah's climate and the toll of his age made simple tasks more difficult. He relied more heavily on his staff to move through the swamps, and his meditation sessions became longer as his body weakened. Still, he remained committed to his purpose, knowing that his time was growing short. Yoda also spent time writing and recording his thoughts, ensuring that Luke or any future Jedi would have access to his wisdom even after he passed on. He reflected on everything he had learned in his long life, his victories, his failures, and the great changes he had witnessed. The Jedi Order had been flawed, but there was still hope for a better future, one where balance could truly be achieved. Yoda's exile was not a period of hiding. It was a time of preparation and atonement. Though the Order had fallen, he never stopped learning, guiding others, and shaping the future from the shadows. Through Qui-Gon's teachings, he mastered the path to immortality. Through Ezra and Kanan, he helped guide the next generation of Jedi. And through Luke Skywalker, he ensured that the Jedi would rise again. His time on Dagobah was not a retreat, it was a final lesson, one that would shape the fate of the galaxy forever. When Luke Skywalker returned to Dagobah, he intended to finish his Jedi training with Master Yoda. However, he found the Elder Jedi on his deathbed, moments away from joining the Force. Yoda would die after giving Luke instructions for his final trial before becoming a Jedi Knight, to face Darth Vader again and confront the Sith. Thanks to the teachings of Qui-Gon Jinn and the Force priestesses, Yoda had learned how to maintain his consciousness within the living Force, allowing him to remain one with the Force and engage with the physical world after death as a spirit. Surprisingly, moments after dying, Yoda chose to appear as a spirit to Emperor Palpatine of all people. This story is told in the canon book Stories of Jedi and Sith. Above the forest moon of Endor, at the tip of a tall tower on the second Death Star, Emperor Palpatine sat in his throne. He looked out onto space and stretched outward into the Force, feeling a network of energy that stretched in every direction. He thought of Darth Vader, of his other apprentices, of killing his master Darth Plagueis, and he smiled. He considered his deformed, ugly face, which he considered a gift from the dark side to make him more frightening. It made others fear him. He thought of how it had been so long since anyone looked at him with anything but fear, and his thoughts drifted to Master Yoda, challenging him in the Senate arena over 20 years earlier. Yoda had stared at him with determined eyes, full of life, not yellowed by darkness. Palpatine remembered their unfinished duel. It did not haunt him, for he had no regrets. He was obviously the victor. Yoda had slunk away to hide somewhere. However, Palpatine thought of how he would like to kill Yoda himself with his red blade. He had looked for Yoda over the years, tasking the Inquisitorius to search for the Jedi's hiding place, made certain probe droids knew of Yoda, but had never found him. Ultimately, he decided that it was not worth the trouble, that Yoda was of no threat to the Empire. But Palpatine did wish to see Yoda a final time, if only to watch him die. He hoped that Yoda was still alive, only to feel the final moments of the Jedi and the rebellion in the coming battle over Endor. He knew Yoda would sense it, feel the pain of their final defeat through the Force. Far away on the planet of Dagobah, Yoda died. The aged Jedi Master was not tired anymore. He was the Force, with it, always had been and always will be. His corporeal body vanished as he became one with the Force. Then suddenly, Yoda felt something out in the galaxy, thinking of him, remembering him, and calling his name. Palpatine felt it immediately. Maybe because he had been thinking of Yoda, his thoughts and feelings already turned in the old master's direction in the Force. Yoda was dead. Palpatine was confused, as he suddenly felt as though Yoda was all around him, everywhere within the Force. He pulled on his anger and laughed to himself repeatedly. Yoda was dead. His laughs echoed throughout the throne room, until he suddenly felt a thrill in the Force. Something impossible happened. Yoda stood before him, hazy and surrounded by a glow as if lit from within. Palpatine did not know if what he saw was real. However, he hid his shock and mocked the specter of Yoda, asking if it had come to watch the final victory of the Sith. He laughed that he would soon take the newest Skywalker as his apprentice, just as he took Anakin all those years ago. Palpatine spun in his throne to face the window, and the vision of Yoda simply replied, "Win, you cannot." Palpatine laughed again and said that he had already won, but when he turned back to Yoda, the specter had vanished. So, like I said at the beginning of this video, this really is one of my favorite short stories in the new canon. I think it's great. I think it adds to the story of Return of the Jedi very well. I think it's really funny that right after death, Yoda would just pop up on Palpatine and basically troll him because he knew that Luke was going to perhaps fulfill the prophecy very soon. I think the fact that Yoda would show up to Palpatine and say that to him really shows the faith that he had in Luke. He told Luke that his final trial would be to face Darth Vader. He told him not to underestimate the Emperor and that he had to confront the Sith. And then he died, and then he showed up to Palpatine and just told him, like, dude, you're not going to win. And I think that's great. I think it's really interesting. It adds to the relationship between Yoda and Luke a little bit, and also the relationship between Yoda and Palpatine, given what we saw established in Revenge of the Sith. But it also just adds more depth to Obi-Wan's relationship with Luke as well, since Obi-Wan talks to Luke right after Yoda dies. Because I just made a video recently about how Obi-Wan thought that Luke was the chosen one, not Anakin. That's why he didn't want to tell Luke that Anakin was Vader, because he thought that if Luke was the chosen one, he would have to kill Vader and the Emperor to restore balance to the Force. So I do really like that Yoda seemed to be more confident in Luke. Maybe Obi-Wan thought that Luke wasn't going to get it done, because when Luke said that he couldn't kill his own father, Obi-Wan said, well, then the Emperor has already won. So I really like that Yoda appeared to Palpatine. I think it's great. I think it's cool that Palpatine was thinking of Yoda at the moment that Yoda died, and then because of that, because Palpatine was already stretched out into the Force and thinking of Yoda, Yoda's spirit manifested to him right away. I think that's very interesting because there is like additional lore that I still find a little confusing about how Force spirits can appear or not appear, how they can manifest to different users. That's really been added onto with Qui-Gon's Force Ghost appearing to Obi-Wan and just saying like, I was always here, you just weren't ready to see me. And, you know, Sam Witwer actually made a great point about Force spirits and how people perceive them in terms of Luke's progression through the Force in the original trilogy, because first in A New Hope, he only can hear Obi-Wan's voice, and then in Empire on Hoth, he sees Obi-Wan and he's like a very faint specter, very translucent, and it's kind of like he's barely there. And then later on Dagobah, he speaks to Obi-Wan again, and Obi-Wan is there, like, talking to him. And then in Return of the Jedi, Obi-Wan, like, sits on the log and has a full conversation with him and stuff. And it kind of adds on to the perception of like, oh, as these characters become stronger in the Force, or as they overcome their obstacles, they can see the spirits more. The spirits can manifest to them. And it gets a little confusing because I feel like Force spirits can't always appear. They're not just like omniscient. They can't just show up every single time and do stuff. They do have limitations to how they can manifest themselves, what they can do in the physical world. You know, Obi-Wan tells Luke in Empire that if Luke decides to fight Vader, he cannot interfere. And I've always interpreted that as like a will of the Force type of thing. Like, you know, they can't interfere with the natural will of the cosmic force. Like, is everything predetermined by the will of the Force? Stuff like that. So I think it's cool that Palpatine was thinking of Yoda, and because of that, Yoda was able to appear to him, because they're mortal enemies, Jedi and Sith, on different spectrums, different ends of the spectrum of the Force. So it doesn't really, you would think like, oh, like Yoda's not going to appear to Palpatine, like they're not connected in the Force. But just because Palpatine was thinking about how much he wanted to kill Yoda and was remembering Yoda, Yoda could appear to him, and I like that a lot. That's pretty much all I've got to say about this short story. I hope that you guys enjoyed it and you like it as much as I do. Thank you so much for watching this video, and as always, may the Force be with you. What's going on, guys? I hope that you are all doing well, and welcome back to another video. Today, I want to take a look at one of my favorite canon stories that I feel is not that well known, and it takes place during the events of A New Hope. In this story, we get to see the events of Episode 4 from Yoda's perspective, which I think is very interesting, so let's jump right in. During the fall of the Jedi Order and the rise of the Empire, Yoda and Obi-Wan did all they could to save what remained of the Jedi and safeguard the future of the galaxy. When it became clear that the Sith had won, the two Jedi Masters decided to bide their time in exile, waiting for the day that the Skywalker twins could help turn the tide and save the galaxy from the dark side. While in exile on Dagobah, Yoda had many years to ponder his role in the destruction of the Order he had been chosen to lead, and he remained racked with guilt and shame for his failures. Using his immense power in the Force, Yoda frequently sensed and observed the events of the broader galaxy, even watching over Luke and Leia as they grew up. 3 years before he would take Luke as his final Padawan, Yoda was indeed aware of Obi-Wan and the young Skywalker undertaking a desperate rescue mission to save Leia and get the Death Star plans into the hands of the Rebellion. When Obi-Wan faced Darth Vader for the final time, ultimately sacrificing his life to save the twins, Yoda felt it immediately. In the canon book Star Wars from a Certain Point of View, we learn how Yoda reacted to his old friend's violent death. In the short story, There Is Another. As Obi-Wan was sneaking his way through the Death Star's hallways, Yoda was preparing to make his seasonal migration across Dagobah, avoiding the heat of the dry season and taking shelter in the lowlands. Suddenly, the old Jedi Master sensed something within the Force, a sensation on the edge of his consciousness that he couldn't fully perceive. Reaching out with his feelings, Yoda felt a familiar vibration in the melody of the Force. It was Obi-Wan. Yoda smiled at the feeling of his old friend and student. His exile had been too long and too lonely, but had the two of them hidden together, the Empire surely would have found them. And there was Luke, headstrong and inattentive just like Anakin. He had needed Obi-Wan's eyes on him. Still, as the vibration in the Force pulsed against his mind, Yoda felt his loneliness grow. It was at least something to feel Obi-Wan's place in the Force, but how good it would be to sit down and talk together, to walk under the stars, perhaps to spar once again. That would be a delight that Yoda could almost not bear thinking about. And then another vibration came, and this one was also familiar. This one was hard and strong, and it pulsed fiercely through the Force. In its rhythm, it carried arrogance and darkness, and for the first time, Yoda noticed that it also carried a terrible loneliness. He was shocked to realize that it was Anakin that he felt. Rather, what had become of Anakin after all those years, trapped within the prison of Darth Vader. Anakin was in pain, and the remedy he used to soothe himself was pain, the pain of both others and himself. Yoda brought his hand to the center of his chest as he was overcome with Anakin's presence in the Force. Then the two vibrations met, and their pulses fought across the Force itself. After a few moments, Yoda felt Obi-Wan suddenly grow exponentially stronger, and then move in a quick burst into the netherworld of the Force. And then Yoda felt Anakin fall even more deeply into his painful loneliness. A loneliness so terrible that Yoda almost felt pity for him. He almost wished he could speak to Vader to tell him that he didn't need to be lonely at all. He thought of the Jedi that Anakin had once been. Yoda lowered himself to the ground as he realized that Obi-Wan was dead, or at least gone from the physical world. He wondered how the loss of Obi-Wan would affect the Skywalker twins. For Yoda, it felt that the galaxy was rapidly becoming emptier. As Yoda settled into his hut in the lowland area, he was too aware of how he could no longer feel Obi-Wan's vibration in the Force. He repeated the same advice that he had once told Anakin, not to mourn or miss those who had transformed into the Force. But he was still lonely and old, and he had failed to save Anakin. And now Yoda feared that Anakin's children would be in danger without Obi-Wan to guide them. More than anything, Yoda missed his old friends that were now gone. So he reached out across the netherworld of the Force for Qui-Gon Jinn, but he could not sense him. He reached again and again, but there was no reply. Instead, another voice replied that Qui-Gon was busy. Yoda was shocked to suddenly feel the overwhelming presence of Obi-Wan, his consciousness maintained within the Force, and Yoda smiled. So, I really love this story. I think that not many people know about it because the From a Certain Point of View books are kinda under the radar for a lot of fans. If you don't know what they are, there's one book for all three of the original three movies, and they're anthologies of short stories that fill in the gaps for the movies. This one is about Yoda sensing Obi-Wan's death, but it also reveals a lot of his thoughts and feelings about Luke and Leia and Anakin's fall during the prequels, and it explains why he actually only wanted to train Leia to be the next Jedi. Yoda thought that Luke was way too much like Anakin and that he would fall to the dark side just like Anakin did, so he only wanted to train Leia. Since she was trained as a politician, she wasn't as emotional as Luke and she was much more level-headed, so Yoda thought that she would make a better Jedi. Obviously, that's a very interesting addition to canon that this story provides, and it's interesting to think about this story while watching A New Hope. The rest of the story that I didn't cover basically reveals how Obi-Wan's spirit convinced Yoda to train Luke instead, and he gets permission to send Luke to Dagobah. But I'm not sure why he asks Yoda during A New Hope, but doesn't send Luke to find Yoda for another 3 years until the Empire Strikes Back. Anyway, this is a great story full of a ton of details, and that's why I wanted to make this video. Since Yoda wasn't introduced until The Empire Strikes Back, I think it's really cool to take a look at his perspective during A New Hope. It also reveals how guilty Yoda felt about Anakin's fall and why he felt that he needed to make sure he got things right with Anakin's children, and he was sure that Obi-Wan was going to be there to guide them, and how he was concerned for them when Obi-Wan died. I think it's great that it shows how much Yoda cared for Obi-Wan, and it adds some depth to their relationship based on what we saw in the prequel trilogy. I hope that you guys enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did enjoy it, make sure to like and subscribe, and as always, may the Force be with you. The duel between Grandmaster Yoda and Darth Sidious was not only a clash of nature between the personifications of the light and dark sides of the Force, it was one of the most pivotal conflicts during the destruction of the Jedi Order and the fall of the Republic. Yoda was the leader of the Jedi Order for hundreds of years, an absolute servant to the light side, yet he had seemingly led the Jedi to their doom. Sidious, also known as the newly appointed Emperor Palpatine, was the reigning Sith Master in Darth Bane's line of Dark Lords. He had orchestrated not only his political ascension to Supreme Chancellor, but the conflict of the Clone Wars and the means to finally destroy the Jedi Order. Their duel within the Senate chamber was a meeting of incredible powers not only in lightsaber combat, but in the Force. In the novelization of Revenge of the Sith, Yoda's thoughts and feelings are explained as he battled Palpatine, revealing some shocking details that really flesh out his character. Before confronting Palpatine in his office, Yoda waited in a nearby vent shaft and meditated. He knew that sometimes the large convocation chamber of the Galactic Senate was referred to as the Senate Arena, and he thought that nickname would be particularly accurate in a few moments. He stretched his muscles, rising from his meditation, and he knew that this was now his time. 900 years of study and training, of teaching and meditation, all now focused and refined and resolved into this single moment. The sole purpose of his vast span of existence had been to prepare him to enter the heart of darkness and bring his light against it. With reverence, with gratitude for the Force, without fear and without anger, Yoda went forth to war. As he entered Palpatine's office, Yoda could feel the truth of himself within the Force as he prepared to confront the Dark Lord. He was not simply a small physical being clad in robes. He was a pure fountain of light inside the Force itself. Yoda told Palpatine that he pitied his new apprentice, Darth Vader, since the young Sith Lord was about to lose his master. Palpatine joyfully greeted Yoda, wishing him a happy Empire Day, to which the old Jedi Master replied that neither he nor the murderer he called Vader would find today happy at all. Palpatine then realized that the disturbance of danger he had sensed in the Force must be a Jedi that Yoda had sent to kill Vader on Mustafar, and he guessed that it must have been Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yoda did not confirm that, and told Palpatine that it was already enough for him to know his own destroyer. As they came to meet each other, Palpatine assured him that even a fraction of the dark side was more power than the arrogance of the Jedi could even conceive, and by living in the light, the Jedi had never seen the depth of the darkness until now. As light and shadow met, the battle was on. Their duel quickly rose into the Senate arena, transcending a simple personal conflict. Their fight was much different than Obi-Wan and Anakin's on Mustafar. This duel was not about Palpatine fighting Yoda. It was about the Lord of the Sith fighting the Master of all Jedi, 1,000 years of hidden Sith plans unfolding against the glory of the Jedi Order. As their lightsaber blades met, it was much more than one of them against the other. It became even more than the Sith against the Jedi. Their duel was the expression of the fundamental conflict of the universe itself, light against dark. Soon there came a turning point in the battle between light and dark. As the duel shifted even more upwards and Palpatine sent delegation pods catapulting towards Yoda, the old Jedi Master sensed a revelation. He was the supreme avatar of the light, and he resolved into the lineage of the Jedi, and that lineage refined into the single Jedi that was him, and Yoda found himself completely alone against the darkness. As Palpatine unleashed his lightning upon Yoda, and Yoda absorbed its power, his vision finally pierced the darkness that had clouded the Force for so many years, and he saw the truth. He realized that he, the Grandmaster of the Jedi Order, the fiercest, most devastatingly powerful foe that the Dark had ever known, could not win. He never could have. He had lost before he started. He had lost before he was born. Yoda saw that in their 1,000 years of hidden exile, the Sith had grown. They had adapted, studying every aspect of not only the Force but of the Jedi, in preparation for this exact day. The Sith had remade themselves and become new, while the Jedi had not. The Jedi had spent the last millennium training to refight the last war. The new Sith could not be destroyed with a lightsaber. They could not be burned away by any torch of the Force. The brighter Yoda's light, the darker the Sith's shadow. He knew at that instant that this sudden insight held the hope of the galaxy, and that if he fell against Palpatine there, that hope would die with him. He needed to ensure that he survived, because the future of the galaxy depended on it. Palpatine could feel how much energy it cost Yoda to withstand his lightning, and he sensed that Yoda had reached the limits of his strength. Suddenly, the shock of the power blasted them both apart, and Yoda fell a very long way. Instantly when he landed, he fled the chamber, for he knew that he had to escape, and he had no chance to destroy Palpatine. When Yoda made his escape, dropping into the speeder of Bail Organa, he felt deeply wounded, but not physically. The only thing hurt was his pride, and he did not yet understand how deep that wound went. So, obviously the duel between Yoda and Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith is not only one of the best fights in the movies, but in universe, it's just so gargantuan in its importance to the galaxy and the conflict between Jedi and Sith. And I think it's a pretty big debate about whether Yoda actually lost, whether Palpatine beat him. I feel like whenever there's conversations about these lightsaber duels in the movies, there's always comments saying, oh, Yoda didn't really lose, he chose to run away, or, vice versa, like Palpatine was losing, but Yoda ran away because he felt that he failed. Everyone has their own opinion on stuff like this, but in terms of the lore that's given to us in the book, it's confirmed that Yoda knew that the Sith had become way too powerful and the Jedi over the last 1,000 years had become weaker, they had become arrogant, they had lost their way, and I think having Yoda realize that during the duel just adds an extra layer of depth to their fight. That's why I really recommend reading the novelization of Revenge of the Sith if you haven't. It just adds so much more context to everything that happens in the movie. It's arguably one of the best Star Wars books ever written, and given everything that is explained during the duel between Yoda and Palpatine, it just makes it all make a lot more sense. Now, in my opinion, obviously Yoda and Palpatine were kind of at a stalemate in their lightsaber duel. Sidious was surprised by Yoda's skill, and that's why he decided to start fighting with the Force. Palpatine in lore did not like using his lightsabers. He believed that a true Sith Lord only needed the dark side of the Force, and that the Jedi needed lightsabers, but the Sith didn't. He told Vader that the Sith only carry lightsabers to humiliate the Jedi at that point in the timeline. They didn't need them anymore. So he starts dueling Yoda, realizes that they're pretty evenly matched in lightsaber combat, so that's why he starts throwing stuff at Yoda and using the Force and then attacking him with lightning. And Yoda's actually able to deflect the Force lightning, so maybe they're even evenly matched in terms of Force power. But Yoda falls all the way down, he doesn't have his lightsaber anymore, Sidious has the high ground, so Yoda decides to run away. So, in terms of that, yeah, it seems like in the context of the duel, Yoda lost. He was defeated. If they kept fighting, who knows really what would have happened? I mean, how long can they throw stuff at each other? And Sidious still had his lightsaber, so Yoda lost the duel. I'm confident in saying that, especially given the context of the book, what the book provides us. Yoda lost the duel. Anyway, that's really all that I have to say. I don't want to ramble too much, but I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did, and as always, may the Force be with you. In his exile on Dagobah, Yoda was forced to return to the basic tenets of a Jedi's existence, maintaining a humble life in solitude as he meditated patiently and observed the will of the Force. While he knew that he and Obi-Wan were not finished with their battle against the Sith, Yoda could not escape his guilt. Visiting the Cave of Evil numerous times over the years, he faced illusions and specters that personified his failures during the fall of the Republic. Yoda carried great shame, knowing that his actions had cast the galaxy into a period of dark times, as the dark side of the Force and the reign of the Empire spread. At the center of his failures rested the fate of Anakin Skywalker. In hindsight, Yoda knew that he had failed Anakin as much as anyone else, and in doing so, he had failed the Jedi Order. As he spent the years waiting for Anakin's children to one day embrace the way of the Jedi, Yoda also reflected on Anakin's transformation into the Sith Lord Darth Vader. In the canon book Star Wars from a Certain Point of View, Yoda's thoughts on Vader are revealed. Yoda spent much of his time thinking of training Anakin's child as his final Padawan. Interestingly enough, this book also reveals that he planned to train Leia, not Luke. Since he had watched both Skywalker twins through the Force, he believed that Leia would make a better Jedi, since she was not as emotional and impatient as Luke was. Yoda would think of his lightsaber, regretting losing it in the Senate chamber because he wished he could place it into Leia's hands one day. Through the Force, Yoda had sensed Darth Vader before. Vader appeared as a strong and fierce vibration, carrying arrogance and darkness through the Force itself. In the rhythm of that vibration, Yoda could feel a terrible loneliness within Vader. What had become of Anakin, whatever remained after all those years, existed in terrible pain. Vader used pain to soothe himself, his own pain and the pain of others. The feeling of Vader's being in the Force caused Yoda to hold his own chest in shock. Yoda could feel Anakin falling deeper into his painful loneliness inside Darth Vader. It was a loneliness so terrible that he almost pitied his old friend. Yoda wished he could speak to Vader, to tell him that he didn't need to be alone. And again, Yoda thought of the past, of Anakin's fall to the dark side. If only what had happened to Anakin had not been hidden from them all. If only he had perceived the paths that Anakin was beginning to follow. It was his own failing. That's why Yoda felt it was so important to train Anakin's child, for perhaps Leia could redeem her father one day. On Dagobah, Yoda accepted that he had grown old and lonely during his exile. He had failed the Jedi. He had not seen what Anakin was becoming before their very eyes, and he worried that he had missed his chance to train either of Anakin's children. While not too many details are given, I personally love this story and am glad to get a glimpse into Yoda's mind. Since Yoda was the Grandmaster of the Jedi Order, fans place blame on him for Anakin's fall to the dark side, and I'm not really sure if I agree with that. Yoda was initially hesitant to allow Anakin to be trained, sensing fear in him. Fear, as Yoda famously said, leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. But despite his reservations, Yoda eventually allowed Obi-Wan to take Anakin as his Padawan. So, did Yoda's decision lead to Anakin's transformation into Darth Vader? I think it's not that simple. Anakin's journey to the dark side was influenced by many factors, including his fear of losing his loved ones, his gradual disillusionment with the Jedi Order, and the manipulations of Palpatine. However, some fans argue that Yoda's strict adherence to the Jedi Code and his inability to address Anakin's struggles contributed to Anakin's downfall. Yoda's teachings often emphasize detachment and suppression of emotions, which may have left Anakin feeling isolated and misunderstood. On the other hand, some might argue that Yoda did the best he could with the knowledge and resources he had. After all, he was dealing with a prophecy that foretold Anakin would bring balance to the Force, not destroy it. Not to mention that the growing presence of the dark side and the Sith clouded the Jedi's ability to perceive the Force itself. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching this video, and may the Force be with you. The duel between Darth Sidious and Master Yoda in Revenge of the Sith was one of the most important battles in the entire Star Wars universe. This fight is described as the two personifications of Jedi and Sith, of light and dark itself, battling each other over the fate of the galaxy. As the Grandmaster of the Jedi Order, Yoda was the only one who could possibly confront the reigning Sith Master. Both masters of their abilities, Yoda and Sidious traded blows with lightsabers and with the Force until their power literally blasted them apart and the duel ended in a stalemate. It depends who you ask, but some may say that Sidious beat Yoda, and others will say that it was a draw. From Yoda's own words, it seemed he believed that he lost the fight and needed to go into exile as penance for his failure. In the story that I want to look at today, Palpatine reveals in his thoughts that he believed he was obviously the winner of their duel. Now, I recently shared this same story about Yoda's Force Ghost visiting Palpatine during Return of the Jedi, so check out that video if you want to see the rest of the story. But there's a pretty big chunk of the story that I left out from that video, where Palpatine remembers his duel with Yoda. Let's jump right into his thoughts as he remembered the day his empire was born. At the northern pole of the second Death Star, orbiting the forest moon of Endor, the Emperor sat at the top of a tower. The tower itself was intimidating, a symbol of domination over his ancient enemies, the Jedi. For centuries, their temple on Coruscant was a beacon of hope and light, and they ruled from a gilded spire. But all their hope and light was now gone, eclipsed by the power of the Death Star. From the throne room, he could see all the galaxy. He leaned back in his throne and stretched out into space with his feelings, and the Force rose up around him, feeling like lightning underneath his skin. The Force drew his senses outward and onward, and he felt rife with anticipation for the coming battle. Palpatine smiled, his lips cracking over his yellow teeth. He considered his ugliness to be a gift from the dark side itself to make him more frightening. All who looked on him feared him. It had been so long since anyone looked at him with anything but fear, and suddenly he found himself remembering Yoda. The Jedi's determined eyes, golden with life, not yellowed by darkness. He could practically see the green glow of Yoda's lightsaber against the red of his own. He remembered the Force lightning flinging from his fingertips, reaching hungrily for the old Jedi. When Yoda laid still on the floor, Sidious laughed. But Yoda rose up, sending him flying backward into the opposite wall with a powerful push. When Sidious got to his feet, he concluded that he had no need to duel this already defeated Jedi, so he leapt for the exit, but Yoda blocked his path. Yoda claimed that Sidious's faith in Darth Vader and the dark side of the Force was misplaced, which enraged the Sith Lord. His anger fueled him, drawing the dark side closer. There was no need for faith in the dark side, he thought, because the greater power of the darkness was simply a fact. Sidious attacked harshly, but Yoda flipped up and around him, parrying the attacks and spinning with his own. The small Jedi Master was fast, his movements making him difficult to pin down, but Sidious met him blow for blow. As their blades clashed, the podium rose up into the Senate chamber. They continued their battle furiously as Sidious laughed and laughed, his cruel cackle echoing against Yoda's grunts of effort. Sidious was enjoying himself, and he knew that killing Yoda would taste good. However, they were well matched, and it was a rough fight, which was exactly what Sidious craved. Sidious leapt from the podium, and instead relied on the Force to throw numerous repulsor pods at Yoda. He could sense the old Jedi tiring, and thought that he had him beaten. But Yoda managed to catch one of the pods and send it spinning back at him. When he leapt out of its way, landing in another pod, Yoda was on him in an instant, moving almost too fast to see. Sidious sent Force lightning at him, but Yoda caught it, sacrificing his hold on his lightsaber. They faced each other, cold blue lightning tying them together. Sidious was tiring now as the lightning reflected in Yoda's determined eyes. Sidious smiled and prepared a final assault with the full power of the dark side. As if he had sensed it, Yoda shoved back with a final burst of strength, and their combined power violently blew them apart. The memory faded away as Palpatine thought of how the clone troopers had never found Yoda's body that night. His unfinished duel with Yoda did not haunt him. He had no regrets. He had obviously won, becoming Emperor of the Galaxy as Yoda had slunk off to hide somewhere. He thought to himself that one could look in any corner of the galaxy and find evidence that he was the victor. Although he admitted to himself that he would like to kill Master Yoda with his own red blade. He thought of collecting Yoda's little lightsaber and placing it with the other trophies inside the Imperial Palace. Although the Inquisitorius had never been able to find Yoda, Palpatine sensed that the old Jedi may still be alive. Sometimes, when he sunk into the Force, his feelings would drift along distant threads of anger, sparks of hatred, and in a faraway place he could sense a note of familiarity, but he could never locate it. After all the years, the very thought of Yoda had become meditative to him. He had defeated Yoda, chased him away, and taken everything that belonged to the Jedi Order. The things Yoda once stood for were ashes, and as long as Yoda still lived, Palpatine would keep winning. He thought to himself that he would like to see Yoda again, just long enough to watch him die. So like I said, the duel between Palpatine and Yoda is obviously one of the most significant and biggest duels in the Skywalker saga, and people like to debate whether they think Yoda really lost, or it was a stalemate and it was tied, Yoda ran away but he didn't really lose, Palpatine won, blah blah blah. There's opinions on both sides. Personally, for me, I would say yes, Palpatine beat him. Palpatine was there, ready to go. The Force blew them apart. Yoda fell all the way to the ground, had no lightsaber, and Yoda made the choice to run away. Yoda's thoughts are described a lot in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, and basically he realizes that he has no chance of beating Palpatine. He starts off feeling powerful and confident, but as the fight goes on, he realized that the Sith are just too powerful. I think the quote that the book gives is that the Jedi lost the war before it even began, because the Sith had become more powerful over the last 1,000 years, while the Jedi didn't. And Yoda just realizes that he needs to essentially live to fight another day. Like, if they're really going to defeat the Sith, he needs to get out of there and stay around to beat them in the future. So I would say maybe Yoda, if he didn't officially lose, get beaten, he forfeited. He quit and ran away. So Palpatine won. He was ready to go. If Yoda jumped back up, Palpatine probably would have killed him. I believe that firmly, so I'm in the camp of saying that Palpatine won for sure. But, like I said, Yoda's thoughts are described in the novelization of Revenge of the Sith, but Palpatine's aren't. So I was very excited to get a glimpse into Palpatine's mind in this book, Stories of Jedi and Sith. I just realized I didn't say the name of the book in the introduction to this video like I usually do, which is weird. But yes, this story is from the book of short stories, Stories of Jedi and Sith. It's called Masters. It is the same story of the video I just made about Yoda's Force Ghost appearing to Palpatine. This is just the middle part of that story. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I certainly did. I feel like anytime you get to look inside Palpatine's mind is very interesting. It's like a little treat to see how evil he is. So if you did enjoy this video, make sure to like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And as always, may the Force be with you.
Spent as much time practicing your saber techniques as you do your wit you would rival Master Yoda as a swordsman. I thought I already did. Only in your mind, my very young apprentice.
By the time of Episode 2, Anakin already believed himself to be better than Yoda with a lightsaber. While this detail obviously just shows his arrogance and his need to excel and prove himself, the reasoning and backstory for this specific instance is explained in the Legends novel The Approaching Storm. Just before the events of Episode 2, Anakin and Obi-Wan, along with Luminara Unduli and Barriss Offee, were sent to Ancion to settle a border dispute. Their mission was to ensure that Ancion did not secede from the Republic, and they needed to settle the conflict between the city-dwelling residents and the nomadic tribes known as the Alwari. While they searched for the Alwari overclan, they were betrayed and captured by a smaller clan called the Kaloon. Eventually they escaped, and afterwards, Barriss complimented Anakin on his skills with a lightsaber. When Anakin rebuffed her compliment, modestly insisting that he was merely following Obi-Wan's orders, she told him that he was obviously very strong. Anakin replied that he practiced hard in his saber skills, explaining that there were those who said that you could define a Jedi by his skill with a lightsaber. He said he wanted his ability to be respected, because respect forestalled fights. Barriss was intrigued and mentioned that she thought Anakin was skilled enough to compete with Master Yoda. Anakin was openly confused, asking her if she was joking, which caused Barriss to become quite serious. She asked why he would think that she was joking, since Yoda was reputed to be the greatest lightsaber master of all time. Anakin admitted that Yoda was a fine teacher of strictly lightsaber technique, and that his dexterity was amazing considering how small he was. He continued, insisting that what Yoda taught at the temple was merely schooling. It was theory and supposition, not real fighting. He complimented Yoda's speed, however he stressed that all of those skills only existed for Yoda in the classroom. He told Barriss that teaching technique was nothing compared to actually using it in battle. He also added frankly that Yoda was very old. Barriss asked him if he thought that Yoda had never used his lightsaber in a real fight, which made Anakin laugh. He confirmed that that's exactly what he believed, and said he doubted Yoda ever dueled outside of the fencing arena. He wondered who Yoda could even fight, given his size. Barriss, growing annoyed, reminded him that it wasn't the size of a Jedi or the amount of power they held that mattered, but the strength of their heart. Anakin nodded, dismissing her claim, saying that he would take size and power over heart any day. Barriss was not impressed, and told him that he should be ashamed to question the proficiency of Master Yoda. He quickly reminded her that a Jedi was supposed to question everything.